Hi, my name's Janie Nichol and I'm the Vice President of the Scottish Artists Union. Thanks very much for coming along tonight, and hopefully it'll be an interesting evening for everybody. Basically I just wanted to give a wee bit of a backdrop about the Scottish Artists Union, because I think there's quite a lot of people who aren't in the Scottish Artists Union probably don't know an awful lot about it. So I'm just going to run through a wee spiel about Scottish Artists Union before Jim is going to introduce everybody. Okay, so the Scottish Artists Union continues to be the foremost campaigning voice for visual and applied artists in Scotland. Scottish Artists Union began in 2001 after the disabandonment of the National Artists Association, which had been a national organisation campaigning for artists nationally within Britain. Scottish artists got together afterwards when it disbanded and had a series of meetings and decided there was a need for an artists union in Scotland. So beginning with a handful of members, we now have a membership of over 1,100 odd visual and applied artists, and this continues to grow. Scottish Artists Union is an autonomous organisation funded entirely by its membership and with a volunteer executive, and receives no other funding, and thus is enabled to have an independent voice. Scottish Artists Union is currently campaigning on issues such as establishing recognised rates of pay, exhibition fees, resale rights, and the coming implementation of universal credit. And recently, executive member Chris Biddlecombe has also been involved in the ECA, which is the European Council of Artists, campaigning internationally for resale rights. Scottish Artists Union has been able to commission research on public entertainment licensing and a yearly members survey, now in its third year, to gain information about and on behalf of the membership to gauge pertinent issues on which we can campaign. Other benefits members receive for the membership, if any of you out there are thinking maybe joining, there's a leaflet on your seat, and other benefits include public entertainment licence of up to £5 million. No, sorry, I've lost my place there. Sorry, I've totally lost my script there. SAU has recently attended the launch of the Artists Union in England, where Chris Biddlecombe again gave a talk about what we have learned as a union. This can be seen as an interesting parallel perhaps with the current political scene, where Scotland leads the way and England then realises it needs to follow. But basically I don't want to go into that because we've got plenty of time for that this evening. This evening was partially initiated through demands from the membership to have some sort of debate around the independence referendum in order for artists to get more information about the future might hold for them. So basically just another couple of things. This is part of a week of things at Stereo, and tomorrow from 7 till 8 in Stereo there'll be Rob Drummond, who's an accomplished playwright who will be creating a performance, I think, to do with the independence referendum. And there's also a drop-in library here at lunchtimes between 12:30 and 2. And there's also a drop-in cafe over at the old hairdressers across the road. Just a final thing, there's a stand here from the Scottish Youth Parliament who have got registration forms if anyone here isn't registered, and you can actually register to vote over at their desk. But anyway, without more ado, I'll just hand you over to Jim Tough, who is the president of the Saltire Society. And if you'd like to introduce everybody, that'd be great. Okay, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Janie. I'm not the president. It sounds too grand. I'm the executive director, and it's tough. Tuch is an Aberdeenshire version of that. My mum didn't like that, so it's like being called a boy named Sue in reverse. So it's Jim Tough. Welcome to this event organised by the Scottish Artists Union as part of the Stereo's Living Room Exploring the Referendum programme. I'm from the Saltire Society. We're a non-politically aligned membership organisation, and our main purpose in life is to advocate for the importance of our culture and creative lives, regardless of who claims to be in charge of the country. and as part of that, we act as a platform for debate and discussion. This is my wee advert, our new pamphlet series includes recent publications on A Plea for a Secular Scotland by Richard Holloway, Freedom of Expression in the New Scotland by Jean Rafferty and Alan Bissett, and this series features a fine cover by Alistair Gray. Next month we'll be publishing 2 major Scottish authors giving their personal account of their voting intentions, so watch out for that. If I can't dance to it, it's not my revolution, said anarchist Emma Goldman. This speaks to me of the connection between creativity and political change. My observation is that one of the features of the referendum debate has been the vocal and passionate expression of support for an independent Scotland from some people in the arts, notably younger artists, writers, playwrights, National Collective, Bella Caledonia being 2 groups reflecting that interest. For those supporting the union, the voices have arguably been less evident on that side, but recent interventions, for example, from J.K. Rowling, perhaps indicate that the picture is far from simple. So tonight, I hope we might explore the idea that, as befits the Scottish Artists' Unions currently campaigning on the artists' rate of pay, of how the arguments for and against independence, are arguments that touch upon the extent to which Scotland is and can be a place where an artist of any discipline can thrive. So the format is I'll do a wee kind of introduction to each of the speakers, and then we've invited them to speak for 5 or 10 minutes on that question of whether the artists can thrive more effectively in an independent Scotland or in the Union. So let me introduce the people on the stage. To my immediate right is Ewan Morrison, born in Caithness, graduated from Glasgow School of Art, a man of many artistic parts who worked in television and as a film director, and has been nominated for 3 BAFTAs and is the winner of a Royal Television Society Best Drama Award. He became a full-time writer in 2005 and has since published 6 books, winning the Scottish Book of the Year Fiction Prize in 2013 for his cracking novel Close Your Eyes. He was a Glenfiddich Scottish Writer of the Year in 2012-13. And Ewan's controversial and formally innovative book, Tales from the Mall, quote, a collection of fiction, non-fiction, analysis, anecdote, reportage and collage, was shortlisted, I'm happy to say, for the Saltaire Book of the Year, but I'm sorry, Ewan, it didn't win. And he was described by the Booker judge Stuart Kelly as the most fluent and intelligent writer of his generation here in Scotland. No offence to any other writers in the room, but that's what Stuart Kelly said. Kevin Oates, on my far left, not just geographically, is a writer, publisher and activist originally, like Ewan, from Caithness, a socialist, a Republican and a campaigner for the legalisation of cannabis. Kevin also has an impressive literary CV. In 1992, Kevin launched a literary magazine called Rebel Inc, and through its pages was one of the first publishers of such Scottish writers as Irvine Welsh and Alan Warner. In 1996, Kevin joined forces with Edinburgh-based Canongate Books to create the Rebel Inc imprint, which in the following 5 years published almost 60 titles, mixing Scottish fiction with international counterculture and the politics of dissent. Since parting company with Canongate Books, Kevin has worked as a newspaper columnist, a cultural commentator, regularly appearing in print and on television and radio. And he's one of the co-founders of Bella Caledonia and director of New Riki, who is moving from Riki to Glasgow, I think, shortly. They're opening a branch here near you. In 2005, he won the Robert Louis Stevenson Award for Literature. His first collection of poetry, A Room Darkened, was published by Two Ravens Press in October 2007. On my right, Sarah Beattie Smith comes from the Scottish Borders, studied sculpture at the Edinburgh College of Art, graduating in 2006. She went on to serve 2 terms, it sounds like a prison sentence actually, 2 terms as President of the Students' Union, leading campaigns, representing the student body in the Board of Governors and strengthening the college's position within the National Union of Students. In 2008, Sarah was elected to the Steering Committee of the National Union of Students, which she chaired for 2 years. She has worked as a communications officer for the Scottish Council of Voluntary Organisations and currently works for Citizens Advice Scotland. And she's also the co-convener of the Green Party branch in Edinburgh and is involved in the Radical Independence Campaign and National Collective. And on my immediate left, Ken MacLeod, born in Stornoway, a graduate from Glasgow University with a degree in zoology and for some years worked as a computer programmer and has written a master's thesis on biomechanics. He now bides near Edinburgh. A man of the left, his science fiction novels often explore socialist, communist and anarchist political ideas. Most particularly, and this is a sentence from Wikipedia that I couldn't resist using, most particularly the variants of Trotskyism and anarcho-capitalism or extreme economic libertarianism. Whatever that is when it's at him. But
I must do something about Wikipedia banner.
But also notable in looking at Ken's books and reading reviews, the use of humour is part of that storytelling process. Ken's general outlook has been described as techno-utopian socialist. Ken has won the Prometheus Award and been shortlisted for the BFSA Award. So a pretty impressive panel. Two with a visual arts background, a lot of kind of literary connections, but I think this conversation is about, if you like, the artist, the creativity in its broadest sense, I hope. So to get things going, I asked each of our panel to prepare a 5-10 minute presentation on something along the lines of whether and or how the conditions for artists to thrive or simply survive are better served in the Union or an independent Scotland. And I'm going to ask Sarah to start off. Thank you.
No pressure. It's all written down here, so I'm just going to be really annoying and use my iPad. So after the last few days, I've been feeling rather undecided, but the yes voters in the room will be relieved to know that it's not about how I'm going to vote. I've been feeling undecided about whether an independent Scotland is more about remaking Scotland out of the ashes or the crumbled walls of the Union that we've just broken by leaving it, or if it's more akin to a blank canvas, a fresh start, that full of possibilities and potential. And my somewhat messy conclusion is that it's a bit of both, but that both metaphors need a bit of work. And I'd been operating on the basis that independence, a yes vote in September, is our chance to remake Scotland, to rebuild it, to reshape it. But those words just didn't feel quite right to me. They weren't powerful enough. They weren't inspiring enough. So I went off and I turned to a big book of words, my mum's old thesaurus, and I started looking out for alternatives and inspiration in there. But what I found couldn't have been further from inspirational. Under the entry for remake, I found repetition and reproduce. But that's not really inspiring. And puzzlingly, I also found the word film under there, and then it occurred to me suddenly that remake is also remake. That awful, dodgy modern version of a classic, maybe lackluster and fake. So I thought, okay, maybe it's about a recreate. So we're creating Scotland anew. But no, for recreate, read rectify, and for rectify, read modify. And none of that was really inspiring at all. It's not about change. For me, independence is about real radical change, the chance to do things differently from how they've been. It's about a culture of confidence and caring, a commonweal society that's more about solidarity than it is about selfishness, and a democracy that lives up to its name and gives power to the people, away from queens and crowns. And that's not a reproduction or a recreation, that's a new nation, with its feet firmly planted in the past, yet facing the future fearlessly. I believe an independent Scotland could be a pioneer, an inventor, an entrepreneur and experimenter, as we have so often been in the past. The Scottish Green Party, that John mentioned that I chair in Edinburgh, has a whole raft of ideas ready and waiting to be put out there into the world and tried and tested. Ideas on reforming democracy so that we're transferring power not just from Westminster to Holyrood, but from Holyrood out into our communities, our industries, our institutions. Ideas on free childcare, free education, and the freedom to pursue what matters most to you. We could establish a citizen's income, a basic income for all, covering the essential costs of living, available to every man, woman and child. It's affordable, even now, under the current economic system. And it could be the backbone of an independent Scotland, a symbol of a new nation of people who value each other, of genuine social security, and a nation that looks beyond financial wealth to social and cultural wealth. Imagine for a second the possibilities for individuals, for artists, of not having to worry about whether you're going to be able to feed yourself this month, about not having to battle with the job centre or the council because you took a wee job here or you got a little bit of income there. Imagine the freedom that that could give you. And imagine the possibilities for our communities if we recognise that social and cultural worth of creative endeavour instead of constantly trying to put a price on it. These things are possible with an independent Scotland, where we're not constrained by the oft-repeated narrative of the UK, the narrative that we're better together in a world where we're intensely relaxed about people getting filthy rich because the wealth would always trickle down. And stuck in that context, where that story is retold so many times that it becomes an irrefutable truth, we're bound to simply modify and rectify and to reproduce and recreate. So what independence offers is that blank canvas, a terrifying, oppressive blank canvas filled with the possibilities and responsibilities in equal measure. The possibility of making new marks, but the responsibility for them to be the right marks. Fear and trepidation mixed with excitement and wonder at the possibilities. I think I, like you, will probably have mixed feelings about a blank canvas or a blank page. That fear is such an overwhelming feeling sometimes, but the passion, the joy that comes with the excitement of that blank canvas, that blank page. And of course, there's no guarantee that we would make a phenomenal work of art, that we would write or paint or build that art. We have to bring all our knowledge, all our experience, all our ideas, and our creativity to the fore and use the resources at our fingertips, the resources we already have to create it. But I truly believe that we're capable of that we have the talent, the passion, and the means to do that. And that's why I'll be voting yes. Thanks.
Thank you very much. As you hear each of the speaker, I hope you're all taking notes of really hard questions and challenges that you're going to ask in due course. I'm going to ask Ken MacLeod to say his wee bit now, please.
We live in a world that faces global problems. Every country was affected by the financial crash. Trillions in public funds have been advanced to save the banks, and the resulting debt and deficit is used as an excuse to cut the services to those who need them most. And this is the case in every country, more or less, whatever its economic system and political system. We all know about climate change, military instabilities on the news every night. In the past few months, it sometimes seemed like our governments have decided to reverently commemorate the First World War by having it over again. None of these are problems to which Scottish independence is an answer. We know that about a quarter of the Scottish electorate is for independence no matter what. And the task for supporters of independence is to roll up the hill to getting it to 50% plus 1 by September 18th. And to do that, they need to do two things. The official Yes campaign has to persuade better paid workers, professionals, business people that not very much is going to change. That we'll keep the European Union, we'll stay in NATO, we'll keep the pound, we'll keep the Queen. And we can at the same time keep a nice high level of social provision without paying higher taxes. And on the other hand, on the left hand, so to speak, it has to persuade lower paid workers and poor people and progressive people, those most likely to support independence and those least likely to vote, that everything's going to change for the better. And that's where our friends here like Sarah and Kevin come in, the pro-independence left, because they can go round the housing estates telling people that Britain's for the rich, Scotland can be for the rest of us. Scotland can be for the workers. And that the way to get there is setting up a new capitalist state in NATO and the EU and firmly under the thumb of Her Majesty in the City of London as a step towards a green socialist anti-war republic. I don't think that's going to work, frankly. And I don't think that after a yes vote, any of the parties of the left, whether it's Labour, if you call that left, or the smaller parties like the Greens and the SSP and whatever's to the left of them and smaller than them, will be in any position to challenge a triumphant SNP's political dominance or any of its policies, including whatever it has up its sleeve, in the very likely event that all is not going to be plain sailing. The SNP is going to be with us for at least a generation ruling the roost. And the first decade or so of independence is going to be dominated by acrimonious disputes with the remaining UK over divvying up the assets, with all the love and forbearance you'd expect in a messy divorce combined with a family falling out over a will. And all of this national bickering and bourgeois bean counting is not going to make politics on either side any more progressive by any measure. To expect, as Irvin Welsh did the other day, you can find his article online, that people in the remaining UK will respond to Scottish independence by moving towards a more generous, more radical, a deeper democracy is another delusion. I think a carnival of reaction north and south is much more likely than any kind of progress. How are artists likely to fare under an independence government? Well, if you enjoy filling in forms and converting currency, go for it. If you look forward to depending on the goodwill of a nationalist cultural apparatus in a small country where everybody knows everybody, hi pals, and memories are long, an SNP hegemony might be just the thing for you. And if you relish the relentless polarization of every issue, of culture, of society, of nature, of beauty, along the axis of the national question, go for it. And if the pro-independence artists and creatives protest, as I'm sure my friends here will, that this is not what they want at all, I would suggest that calling yourselves names like National Collective and Bella Caledonia is not the way to reassure us. I think that most artists would prefer to keep their independence, and that's why I'll be voting no. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kevin?
They say you should campaign in poetry and govern in prose, so it's just a few poetic words maybe to sum up how I feel. Quite famous ones by one of England's greatest ever writers. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. A Tale of Two Cities from Dickens in 1859, and that's basically how I feel. That's the crossroads. I feel we're at a tale of two countries. Two competing narratives put before the people of Scotland. The realities of Britain, the possibilities of an independent Scotland. And the British narrative, just to very briefly, it's a very clear narrative if you look at it from 1945 to 2014, a 70-year trajectory. You know, it started out a bit like the French Revolution, victory over fascism, in place of fear, the NHS, social housing built everywhere, the welfare state, we had a post-war economic boom. The Tories were telling us you never had it so good in the 60s. There was optimism, there was hope, there was industry, full employment, and a pretty cohesive society in the 60s. And then, bang, it all came to an end in the 70s. Everything went wrong. From 1976 was the turning point. And this is a trajectory that continued. The IMF came in, it bailed out the Labour government, $4 billion, and it insisted on cuts. And no matter which way you look at it, for the last 40 years, it's been a long, continuous narrative through 4 Labour governments and 5 Conservative governments of cuts, austerity, privatisation, inequality widening, the depression of wages, poverty. We've now got food banks, the deindustrialisation of Britain. There's now only 2 million people make things in a country of over 60 million people. That's been one of the narratives. It's been relentless for 40 years, and there's no sign of it changing, because piece by piece, bit by bit, week by week, year by year, the banks, the City of London, the corporations, the land and property speculators and the corporate media have gradually fused with the political system in Britain, with Westminster, with the three parties. They've emptied them out. They're three shells of a party. There's hardly anybody left in them. They've got no real power. They're puppets of the power and the elites in Britain. There's no doubt about it. That's been the case. Labour will not ride in on a white horse. It didn't for the last 4 governments, and it never will again, because it's been completely gutted, emptied, and it's now a plaything of the elites in this country. That's our narrative. That's the British narrative. What I find is really optimistic is now, for the first time, there's an alternative narrative put before the people of Scotland, which people in England are watching very carefully. And you mentioned Irvine Welsh's column. He began it, it was in yesterday, the 700th anniversary of Bannockburn, which nobody really paid any attention to. It was no big deal. It was just a historical moment to look back on. Irvine caught the mood far better. Something strange and beautiful is happening in Scotland. The country is reinventing itself from the inside out. People are talking about their futures as if they actually have them, and it's that exhilarating, intoxicating, and occasionally exasperating phenomenon at work. Welcome back, participatory democracy. How much these islands have missed you. And I feel like that. This is where we are just now. This has been the most amazing thing, this referendum. It's been a ferment of ideas. We've seen a grassroots revolution taking place of engagement with politics. I had felt it had gone in Scotland. I was active in politics during the 80s when there was that. It had gone, and the radical independence campaign, the National Collective, which is running a fantastic festival from Shetland right to the borders. All the other people, women are reimagining gender in Scotland through Women for Independence. Lawyers are looking at the legal situation of Lawyers for Independence. There's so many groups. It's national. It's all across the country. It's a grassroots-driven campaign that's pushing this. And we've now got space to dream, space to think, and space to create actions that can change our lives way beyond this referendum. And I think there's these possible spaces. It's really, this is what's caught my imagination. It's the absences that exist and the alternatives, because people are looking outward, way beyond Scotland. There's a number of writers on this panel, and I was doing some research looking at writers. Now, writers are pretty much depressed, really, because everybody's skint. Nobody's getting their... Literary fiction's getting harder and harder to sell. We're in a situation where it's very hard to make a living from writing. Doesn't stop writers writing, they'll keep going, but it's a dire situation. Ewan's written fantastic stuff about it just now. I looked at Norway, a country where our aspirations look towards. This comes as a shock when I've told writers this. In Norway, the government buys 1,000 copies of every book a Norwegian author publishes. It provides £19,000 public subsidy to every author who's a member of the Authors' Union. This is what was really striking, was the Association of Bookstores allow a monopoly on the sale of books, and it's prohibited by law to price competition. It's price fixing. It's like the old netbook agreement that existed until the 90s. Norway requires by law that bookstores keep books in store for 2 years, regardless of sales, and books are exempted from VAT and sales tax. Now, some of those powers, we can, if you take a decision and you work for it, that the primacy of the market, and that includes Waterstones and Amundsons, is not important to us. The primacy of the literature is more important. Then you can use the legal powers that will only come from independence, because you need the powers over VAT. You need the legal powers to change the law on bookshops and that. We can create a culture of independent bookstores and authors who are able to have time and space to write. It would be a completely different culture. Same goes with TV, film, radio, music. There's things you can do legally through independence, through having control, for example, of broadcasting. We need an independent Scotland to control the broadcasting. It's a reserved matter, because without that, we can't regenerate a moribund radio and TV culture in Scotland. It's absolutely moribund, and you need to have a thriving TV culture, TV industry, if you're going to regenerate the film industry, because all the countries that have got fantastic film industries, especially the smaller countries in Scandinavia, they have TV companies commissioning them, and they're able to invest in writers, actors, the technical people, The production, Scotland produces 5 feature films a year on average. This is not a film industry. They're often about aliens, zombies, Neds, or crime. You know, you can take your pick. They don't actually reflect the drama of everyday life in Scotland. We don't have teen movies. We don't have all the things of love and relationship. There's no Kiariostamis. There's no Ozus. There's none of the people who are producing, sometimes on a small budget, the type of films where people are just living ordinary lives but a heightened drama. We've got very little historical movies. Where are the movies about the clearances? Where's the movies about John Murdoch? Where's the movies about Red Clydeside? Take away the politics. Where's just the everyday movies of culture? Robert Louis Stevenson, no movies about him. Robert Burns has never made a single good movie. No other country would allow that situation to exist. It's a very, very different scenario that's developed. In Ireland, because they've controlled taxation, and this is not an offer in more powers, they can create a 32% tax relief for movies. Here it's only 25. We need all these powers to try and make sure we can make movies and not just, because you need that to reflect yourself to the wider world. Music, there's all sorts of things you can do. In France, they passed legislation a while ago where stations have to have at least 1 in 3 songs have got to be recorded in French. They're challenging the English language hegemony of pop music, and it's been an amazing thing in France where people are recording in French and taking pride in that. We can do that for the music industry here. We could insist that you do not get a license for a radio station unless you play a percentage of songs recorded here in Scotland. You can do that, because I'll tell you what, you could fill them. Scotland's got an amazing music industry, but nobody's making money off it. They're not getting royalties apart from a few bands at the top. You could look at all these things, theatre, visual arts. The education system's key to that. We need to turn it upside down. You need resources. Basically what I'm saying is that the British narrative is bleak. It's not done it for us in the last 40 years. We know where it's going. It's going to be more austerity. Creative Scotland's already having its budget reduced by 11% between 2011 and 2016. We're suffering. It'll get worse. But once the Barnett formula gets turfed, if you had a no vote, you're stifling talent in this country. I worked in a prison last year, and the amazing talent that the prisoners had, we produced a book together, and there was 90% illiteracy in the prison. And I just thought, how much talent is going wasted in this stagnant society that we live in Britain? Independence, we need all powers. So,
Fell asleep.
Did you fall asleep? Just when I'm getting into a flow, what a cheat. But basically what I'm saying is we've got one chance. I think it's the only chance in my lifetime to actually take part in constructing something new. And if you're creative, then the chance of building a new type of society is so exciting. It could pull all the creative energies within Scotland, because the genie's out the bottle now. We've seen it. There's too many people wanting things, wanting to change the way structures are, that are prepared to challenge the old orthodoxies. To me, I'm voting yes, because this is really exciting, and I think it's what goes beyond September that I'm looking forward to. Thank you.
I'm really disturbed by some of what I'm hearing. I'm undecided for a lot of reasons politically. Not least of all is the kind of extreme left-wing rhetoric mixed with nationalism that I hear, and I could hear in what Kevin was saying, and also in what Sarah was saying. By that I mean this notion that everything happens through the government. That once we change the government, we'll do these things, we'll make these laws, we'll pass these cultural restrictions, we'll make these government tax breaks. It's all government, government, government. I think back on the history of the arts, and I wonder how much Cézanne thought about the government, or Andy Warhol, or even Bob Dylan. I mean, it was against every government, but you know, how much does the government play in any vibrant culture activity? And the answer is the government only just tops up where private capital is lacking. Scotland is a country, its biggest problem in culture is there's no fucking venture capital. It's not very good at capitalism, and none of the venture capital goes to the arts. I've been on several projects, involved with several projects, a film and a book, where we've had to go cap in hand to the government and to England to look for extra capital. Well, we had to look for match funding capital for the government funding that we already had, and we could not find it in Scotland. Now, where is all of the wealth in Scotland going? I had this explained to me by a publisher recently. It's not the way Americans spend money on venture, on let's try something new. The big money in Scotland is extremely conservative. It's all mashed up with pension funds, mortgage reinvestment, mortgage repackaging. The wealthy in Scotland have really nothing to do with culture. Now, I'd like us to move away from a notion that we just go cap in hand to the government to make culture, because I don't want to have to make films about Culloden. And sorry, there's been quite a few Robert Louis Stevenson movies. In fact, there was a fantastic one with Ian Glenn not so long ago, filmed in New Zealand, actually. I don't want the cultural restrictions. I just look at the number of art forms that exist without government subsidy in this country, and which no amount of government subsidy would make any impact on. I look at high art. By that I mean like the stuff that's sold internationally through places like the Modern Institute. That barely even touches this country. That's international capital on a big level, circulating. Scotland only takes money from that private venture capital. I look at bands like Mogwai, bands like Belle and Sebastian, who do Kickstarter because they've got so many fans. They don't really need state funding. It's usually the older, dying art forms that need state funding, and the argument runs that if we didn't subsidise them, they would pass away, like opera, like poetry, like what else? Theatre as well. Theatre and even film. We don't really have private funding in this country for these things. Now, as someone who thinks a vibrant Scotland has to make some money from somewhere, if everything's just articulated through the government and all the money passes through the government and then back into the hands of people, you're not actually generating any new capital. I want a vibrant capitalist Scotland, in a sense. I want Scottish artists to be being paid. Otherwise, there'd be no point us having an artist or writers union in the first place, because we wouldn't have any rights to fight for. I'd like to see artists fighting for another 10% in their international foreign sales rights. I'd like to see some of Scotland's wealthiest artists returning to Scotland, because that's something we have not talked about, is the cultural flight that goes with the capital flight. We're not naming any names, but the number is increasing. So I'd like us to get away from just thinking about a change of government will be necessarily good for culture, and just to focus on actually, well, the best kind of culture you can possibly have is one that doesn't even need a government. So it's just a slightly different take on things. When the state does get involved in culture, I think what the state should do is it shouldn't do, as Kevin says, which is make sort of a cultural remit and demand in terms of content. I think the state should stay the hell out of content. I think what it should do is it should create infrastructure, galleries, buildings, film studios. Money that then circulates through these places gets put back in. If you're a state funding agency and you fund individual projects and individuals, the money just goes into the pocket of the individual and no infrastructure is created. So if we're going to play the state intervention game, we should stay the hell away from making any kinds of aesthetic judgments about content whatsoever. Just let the people of Scotland generate their own culture, give them a wee bit of a hand. And the thing about state funding is you give them a wee bit of a hand in the hope that they'll be able to stand on their own 2 feet without government subsidy. We don't want a culture industry that's on the dole. We want a vibrant, thriving culture industry, one that doesn't even notice the government's there. So, having said that, there are some good things you can do if you have total government control. Because I'm undecided. Here we go. A country with 500 publishing houses, all state-funded, with mandatory education in the national classics. A writers' union that has shut down Apple Macintosh stores and blockaded the entry of Amazon into its country. It has literacy programs in schools. It has a quota the government has imposed on the populace for reading high culture. It also has the largest book market in the world, and this is China. So if you want to, if we want to go down the avenue, Norway's the thin end of the wedge of that sort of socialist control. We can go to communist China and enforce reading and own all the publishing houses and have a vibrant, massive cultural economy if we had the population. I'll just stop there. Anyway, I'm still undecided, as you can see, but I'd like us to move things away from just the same old sort of tired leftist rhetoric. Part of the problem I find with the left is the people who expound leftist rhetoric don't really realise that for everyone who's not on the left, including the people with money, you just want to run a mile. And if the left encourages capital flight from Scotland by corporations going, oh, fuck, we're going to be taxed at like 65% and they're going to give it away to people to make programs about Culloden, we don't have anything to do with that, then the left will be responsible for actually the destruction of inflow of capital into the country. And you can't redistribute money that you don't earn. So I'd like us to be a bit more pragmatic as we move on.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. That was really kind of a very broad and kind of, I think, interesting range of thoughts and possibilities. I mean, one of the things that occurs to me listening is that a lot of the things that you might do to improve the conditions of working artists in Scotland are already possible within the devolved Parliament. So there's something interesting there about how that plays out, I think, in some of these arguments already. I think there's things like in the visual arts tomorrow night. I think the Generation programme's being launched, celebrating 25 years of success in Scotland, and thinking about what are the conditions that have been created in Scotland that have allowed or encouraged or created that success. Seems to me to be something else around that. And not just about who runs the country, but how the country is run in terms of creating those conditions for you guys to do what you do best and what you want to do, which is create great art. So there's a few bits in this I think that are interesting. But I would like to hand it over now to the floor for you to either comment or question individuals or the panel collectively and your general response to what you've heard from the stage. So I don't know if there's roving microphones in that great tradition or if you're all loud enough to be heard. I'm sure that's possible. But any initial responses, thoughts, comments, questions, please? Over far right.
Probably not. But it's interesting. It feels like the advocating that needs to be more venture capital is replacing what you criticise as the patronage of the state with the patronage of the very rich. And what was more interesting was the idea of Kickstarter stuff. That lots of small people can buy and choose, we want this, we want this. That could be mediated by some sort of state funding, like people talking about funding political parties by, passing money through to them. But I think there's also, your criticism of the left rhetoric is important too, because I think this is being hosted by the Scottish Artists Union, and everyone here, lots of people here are cultural workers. And what's been ignored is actually that you're talking about who runs the country. There's this idea that actually people should run the country. And actually, if we're thinking that what's going to happen is there's going to be an election, all these policies are going to be imposed from the top down, that's not going to work. I agree, that's not going to work. But it's the opportunity to sort of say that, look, you have great venture capital in England, and Scotland's been left behind, the north of England, and Newcastle. Newcastle had loads of state funding, right, during the Blair years. You've got the Baltic, you've got all that. Didn't change much, Once the Tories came in, that's all disappeared. So I think the point is use of boring old leftist rhetoric is actually the power in cultural workers taking charge and maybe working in solidarity with each other to defend their rights to certain levels of income. That's what's going to change things, not going begging to the state or going begging to very, very rich people.
So in that sense, can I ask you, in that sense, do you think whether or not Scotland's an independent nation is relevant to that proposition?
I think whether any country is independent within a global system where we all say that it's very important to have capital, not to have food or art or enjoyable things, where we're constantly mediating things by saying, oh, we've got to worry about the capital flight, we've got to worry about these people taking the money away. You know, fuck them, right? You know, I don't care about them, they're exploiting people. But actually, you've got to think about organising your society a different way, because it hasn't worked for 70 years, as we said. You have this little attempt with the arts councils. In America, you've had an attempt to like let people get really rich and let them dish bits of money out now and again. Neither of those methods have worked. You've got to find something that goes down the middle. Where opportunities for that come from, within the UK or within Scotland.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. Right. Any of the panel want to respond to that?
I think you've got a rather skewed idea of culture. You seem to say that culture is somehow going to be the model through which you fix society. I think culture is in a much more screwed up situation just now, where it's being rapidly demonetised by precisely things like the internet and by big corporations who are underpricing to put each other out of business. I think the survival of culture is more important than using culture as a metaphor for the transformation of society. I think that's something we can leave behind until we fix culture.
I think it's a good thing that culture is demonetised. Why put a price on everything? Why add money to everything and make that the measure of all our worth? I think that's a really sad.
Well, who pays your wages? Who pays your wages?
Well, all of us. I suppose I'm kind of, in a convoluted way, paid by the taxpayer.
Yeah, you're paid by the government. Fine. Well, the government gets its money from people who make money.
And I pay
not
it back
from the
in taxes.
not from the government.
And I spend my money.
No. You're on a spiral of diminishing returns there. You work for the government, you pay your taxes to the government, you get more money from the government. There's got to be. Maybe you're not so involved in culture, to be honest.
Okay, so a spat has broken out on stage. Excellent, and we're making good progress. You gentlemen hearing it.
You're kind of being really like idealistic about the idea of money. Money is just a representative of value, right? We put value on certain things and convert it into money. When you're saying certain people create money, who are you talking about versus like what's more important to having an idea of value, right? And then we can come up with a system of distributing value through money, if you want to call it that. But we need to start valuing other things, like forms of work which aren't at the moment valued.
Would I just like to say,
No idea what that means.
if you're talking about like art is actually a reflection of society, and if we're all going to go in here and vote yes, and it becomes like an independent country, therefore, like the reflection of that society, which is the art, will be different and it'll be more interesting. So in other words, it will create more information for artists to use in their art, so therefore it will be a better art, or a different art, something different. Is that not a good thing? Nothing to do with money or funding or fuck all.
Yeah, okay.
Did Irish art become more interesting after independence?
I think it did.
Was Flann O'Brien a greater writer than James Joyce, or Oscar
Probably,
Wilde, or George Bernard Shaw,
Yeah.
or Yeats? What, you know, I'm not...
Yeats left after independence.
Yeah, but, you know, the whole Ireland in the 30s and 40s was not a tremendously nice place to be if you were a creative artist.
But the point is, if art is the reflection of society, and society stays the same over and over and over again, art's going to reflect that and it'll just be the same, so that's no good. We need new stuff.
Well, I couldn't agree more that we need new stuff. That's what I keep trying to do.
Yeah, I agree. I think artists have a duty not just to reflect society, but to reimagine things, reimagine themselves and reimagine the greater society. And I think that sometimes you can, you know, it's very easy to talk in a very kind of dogmatic way if you've only just said a little bit of what you think. But the reality is, post-independence, if we go yes, then I know, I speak for myself, and probably a lot of other people, 19th of September, get drunk, 20th of September, go into opposition to whatever government comes in Scotland, SNP or Labour, total opposition, and be part of a grassroots movement, because for me, culture, I agree with you in a lot of things, which is unusual for a wicker, like any spiritual person here. But one of the things I agree is that culture government should have no input into the content of culture, absolutely none. I could give you examples of a very famous film that came out last year, a really great film. A friend of mine was involved with it, of how they actually, Creative Scotland actually tried to manipulate the content of the film. They wanted it to be tourist friendly. They wanted it to be filmed in certain areas, and they were like, "Get the fuck! No way are we doing that?" So they filmed it somewhere else. And so I think the grassroots culture. None of the stuff I've set up. I didn't go for money for Rebel Inc. I never got a penny of it. From the government when we did it. We set up Noiriki. We just did it. I have got some money. I've had investment, private and public, in Noiriki, so we can expand what we do. And nobody's ever told us, you can do this or can't. We just do whatever we want. As soon as somebody says, as an artist, you've got to say, no, we don't want any more money from you. And I think that grassroots, we can reimagine Scotland a little bit culturally as well as economically, and we don't have to be, one of the things I would like to see is the people who have control of the funds, I'd like to see that control passed over to artists. I think the people who actually use the funds should be thinking behind how these funds should be used and where they go, rather than committees that just seem to appear and are appointed in secret,
I need to come clean here at this point. I used to be the Chief Executive of the Scottish Arts Council before it disappeared, so I have been involved for that side of things. And actually, I agree with a lot of what's been said there about that kind of need to get a big, they call it the arm's length, the arm is forever getting shorter. That notion that any artistic decision should be made amongst the artistic community, absolutely believe in that notion. I personally also think that there is a role for public support for arts and artists, whether it's an infrastructure, whatever it is, it's helped a lot of things. But I suppose one of the things I'd be interested to hear from the audience and the panel is there are different ways of coming at that. I mean, one of the examples currently in France is there's the potential strike about the change to the legislation on back of austerity measures, where artists who can prove they're practising their activity get an unemployment benefit that requires them not to go and see work. So there's policies, and I don't know if it's those kind of things for you guys as members of the Scottish Artists Union are imagining, where are we going to get that kind of refreshed and kind of dynamic support for what it is we are doing? What would that look like? So I'm interested to get your thoughts on that as well, if you have any.
In order to reflect society, currently we don't have a level playing field. The arts is very much, I think Britain has become a two-tier society. Just like we have first-class travel on trains, which are actually going exactly the same distance and the same speed, going to the same place for everybody. There's a different class of travel in British Rail. It's the same with the education system and the same with the healthcare system. And I think it's the biggest fundamental problem in our society is that, for those who come from a certain background, you can expect certain things in life, and that our country has been totally stifled by the fact that such a large percentage of the population, their background defines their aspirations in life and what they can achieve in life. And until we have that, then, if we can have a more even society, if we can have opportunities for everybody, then we will definitely have a much more interesting culture, because that will be reflected within the arts. And at the moment, the arts doesn't reflect that. The demographic of people, of who can get into art college has changed over my lifetime, definitely. The ability of young people to get into art colleges, to go to university, that's all changing, and that, I think that's fundamentally wrong with society. And I'm looking towards a new Scotland where we will have more fairness, that no matter where you're born and who you're born to will affect how you get on in life, because you'll have much more of a chance to have those opportunities.
I just think that
you call me naive.
You're naive. You're naive, and actually, what you're saying doesn't make any sense, because it's a circular argument.
Why can't we have that?
No, but what you're saying is, in a new country, we will have a new culture, and therefore it will be better just because it's new.
Same country, but they're different.
I know, but you're not actually saying anything. It's just the sound of positivity without any content. Let's look at what really works in our culture. What really works in our culture? What institutions? No, nonsense. There are people that nonsense.
Well, hold on.
There are people that you and I both went through art school with that came from working class backgrounds who are now internationally renowned artists. That's a success. It's not all doom and gloom. I don't see your picture.
chances of you achieving are so much greater than if you go to state school. And okay, we could talk for hours about the education system, but you know, I think basically my philosophy is, you know, if you have a two-tier system, it's bound to be flawed, and it isn't going to be reflect your, you know, culture. It isn't going to be interesting and reflect society.
If I may say something about two-tier systems, one of the things that galls me most about the SNP government and its left-wing outriders is that the idea, the myth that it provides certain universal benefits. A blatant example being the tuition fee, the university education without tuition fees. That has been paid for with a swinging attack on the pay, conditions, places, and so on of further education colleges. It's a middle-class tax perk at the expense of the lower paid working class population and youth. That is a fact. Similarly, the free personal care is paid for by running the carers off their feet to the detriment of themselves and to the people they're caring for. I know this from experience and is borne out by, you know, the figures. The free prescriptions are paid for by more pressure on other areas of the NHS. As my wife knows, she's a nurse, she gets under pressure all the time. And what really annoys me is that this facade of universal benefits is held up by the SNP's left-wing outriders in the Socialists and the Greens and so on as evidence of how progressive it is. Take it from me, the Scottish middle class is one of the most canny and selfish and cold-hearted in the world. I should know, I'm one of them. And they are not going to start shelling out extra tax for that after independence.
I would like to debate that actually, because the problem with our education, our healthcare system at the minute is the fact that we put revenue into a central pot and we get a certain amount back. It doesn't equate. And I guarantee you, in 5 years' time, we can, if we do not vote no, we can say goodbye to our national health, free national health, and we can say goodbye to our education system. And then where does that leave us? Also, on your point of artists wanting to be independent, how does that figure in with this new universal credit system?
I don't support a universal credit system. I don't support a universal basic income.
But that's what's coming.
Well, excuse me, but I didn't say I supported every policy of every existing government. Thank you very much.
No, but supporting by supporting a no vote, that's what's coming.
You just claimed everyone supports the SNP if they're voting yes. So surely you support
No, I'm not.
No, he said there were left-wing outriders, he said.
Right.
I'm not saying that everybody who supports. I know very well there are people who vote yes. Most of my friends are going to vote yes. I'm generation yes. I'm bang in the top demographic for yes vote. Okay, my age group. I'm just below my bus pass birthday. My sex. I'm male, in case you hadn't noticed. We are the people who grew up under good old post-war social democracy, whether it was Tory or Labour, who got to university with grants, and then everything seemed to go horribly wrong in the mid-70s, and we will never forgive or forget. And for that reason, many of my friends and people I really like and respect are going to vote yes. I'm not going to pick any quarrels with them, but I most certainly have bones to pick with the way that a large part of the Scottish left has got behind the yes campaign.
But I think your point was that, okay, our education system and the NHS system isn't great, and actually it's under a lot of stress at the minute. I wonder if a lot of that stress is actually because of the kind of budgets we're already being given. And my argument to you is, if we don't vote yes, we say goodbye to that completely.
There is a parallel to that, because if you look back, I remember in the 1980s, local authorities were like centres of resistance against what was seen as Thatcherite policies. All over the country, Labour-controlled authorities, to a lesser or greater degree, tried to resist the privatisation culture, tried to resist the whole monetisation and cutbacks. That's gone. You look at local authorities now, there's not one single political authority in this country. There's none of them. You can't tell the difference between any of the parties and local authorities, Glasgow, Edinburgh, anywhere. It's all managerialism, looking after. That's the future of the Scottish Parliament, if we vote no. A managerial Parliament that's got limited resources and that no longer even attempts to try and better people's lives. That's the future in the Scandinavian countries. This is something much more aspirational than just letting the market destroy and dictate everything. I think that needs a culture of enterprise, small and medium enterprises. It needs all the levers of power to create that kind of enterprise. My illusions in state, socialism have been destroyed a long time ago. I don't think, I agree with you on that, but I still believe we can create a socialistic, social democracy society where everybody can feature in.
Just on this notion of an enterprising Scotland, I think one of to just talk about the facts as to what's really going on in Scottish culture. If we're going to have, as Janie says, a new society and it will make a better culture, we have to look at who's making the decisions at the moment, and do we still want these people to have anything to do with decisions in the future? For example, as a writer, I witnessed 4 Scottish publishing houses going bust within 6 months of the Scottish Government giving £12.5 million to Amazon to set up a huge big store with, its sweatshop labour in Dunfermline. Did I think that was a wise move? No. And did it make me believe that the SNP knew a damn thing about culture other than just opening the floodgates to monopoly capitalism? Let's just skip, capitalism entirely and go for monopoly capitalism instead. I saw the SNP as a very scared and amateur political organisation using our tax funds to fund a massive multinational corporation that more progressive countries are saying no to be perfectly honest. Like Norway, like China. Well, there you go. That's more progressive, definitely. Yeah, but, that made me question the whole yes vote. I can't really get behind people who do damaging my industry. I can't get behind, this is happening in music as well just now. Have you noticed the whole spat with Google and bands like Radiohead, whatever? All the indie labels are being squeezed out because of a new internet deal. It's kind of like what Amazon does. It pushes all the prices down for all the books. I now have to sell 3 times as many books as I did 5 years ago to make the same amount of money, and my advances have gone down. All issues for an artists' union. Amazon's a big mistake for the Scottish Government to get behind. And if the yes vote is more of the same of that, then we can embrace not a better future because we have a new culture, but a more corporate monopolistic future.
I'd be interested to hear from the audience, I guess mostly visual artists, what the concerns or fears or the dynamic around that in terms of you guys making a living and all that. What are the things that you would see as important, if you like, policy issues for you to be able to do your work in relation to independence or not? None? Sorry, up the back.
I think the SNP has kind of stolen the coat of culture really, and that's what worries me. And it's kind of happened because there's been a huge vacuum of involvement in the Labour Party. Everyone's come out of the Labour Party that kind of had that kind of approach and maybe was involved in kind of cultural industries. And I think it worries me. When I think about voting yes, I have to separate out the SNP from that, because I think quite a lot of what they stand for and kind of things that they support, like the homecoming events, the Bannockburn things, they're all cheesy, sort of cultural, kind of empty, media kind of savvy things. And I work in arts education, and I don't see the infrastructure on the ground has improved at all. There's certainly a lot less money is going into that area of work, and that worries me. And the SNP, I don't know if Fiona Hislop was involved in that decision, was the cultural coordinator scheme in Scotland that was set up. was the money that SNP made the decision to take the money away from that. And you never hear about that from the SNP now. Very conveniently, Bruna Hislop's decided that the arts have got a different kind of slant for her now. So that, it does kind of worry me that there's not a kind of an alternative discussion happening around that. And just the basics of artists that are working in participative engagement, finding it much harder to get money, to get funds to make that kind of work happen. It's not very democratic.
That sounds like Linda, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry.
I can't see your face, but I recognise one. Somebody next to you there.
Yeah, well, firstly, I think just to say to the panel, it's fantastic that you're all here putting your money where your mouth is, so to speak. And to the people that are here in the audience, great that we're here as well. My yes vote is definitely not very much to do with the SNP. The story that I actually hear myself saying about my yes vote now is that the rhetoric of my yes vote is that my yes vote is a vote of a commitment to being involved in local politics. Is my personal commitment to make a yes vote, to say I can make a difference. I get really excited about the fantasy or the possibility, however removed from that. I said recently to Nicola Sturgeon's right-hand woman, what do I mean when I say that I'm going to get involved in local politics when I make a yes vote? And she said, well, you don't mean party politics. You probably mean, you know, at a grassroots level doing this or that, being in rooms like this, on panels like yourselves, passing comment and all sorts of things, attempting to make a bit of difference. So my yes vote is very much about that. So the people that are undecided, you and others, I think, you know, who couldn't be excited about the things we might say. I spent some time, didn't put too much time into the being on the executive of the Scottish Art Union. I had to leave last year because I simply spent no time on it. But I spent time with some really great people who were putting time and energy into mobilising artists into being a union. Now there is a total kind of paradox. An artists' union is a moving paradox. Artists are absolutely allergic to the idea of a union and to any kind of herd mentality. And yet people could see that there was value in being a union, and now last year the union became over 1,000 members, which I think seemed to be a significant moment. It's a tiny wee statistic, but also kind of quite exciting, I think. And so I think, you know, for us all to be imagining what I think the real question to an artist community is not in repeating any of the hierarchical structures, which include kind of processes like 25-year surveys of the best of kind of art in Scotland. I hate all that shit. Mainly because I don't get invited to those parties very often.
You have my ticket.
You know, so I really think we can, within the arts, we have to work very hard to reimagine systems that we feel kind of allergic to, that we might be part of. Because we are naturally contrarians, we are naturally by birth allergic to governments or big organisations, more than 3 peoples of any sort. And yet to take some part, to make some impact into a new Scotland, we would have to do that very thing. And this morning, when I imagined coming here tonight, I remembered why I began as a no voter in a pub with Roddy Buchanan berating me for not even having a well-formed opinion on it. And I realised this morning what was the basis of my no vote. The basis was I loved the idea of an arsehole like David Cameron making ugly decisions about shit that I didn't want to have to think about. Because let's face it, even in grassroots politics, there are all sorts of ugly decisions to be made. There are difficult languages to be brokered. There are compromises to be that we all really want any part of that? And I guess it has to be very tasty indeed to convince any of us that we would sit in a panel like this, or we would come out and put our voice forward, or we would bother to join a union, or we would contribute to decisions that are always going to be about compromise and failure and having to try again to do a wee bit better. And me personally, I've decided I'm old enough now to stand up, take some responsibility, and say yes to that. Yes, I would like to give that a wee go and to see what could happen if I did.
I mean, obviously an inspiring thought, because I think one of the things, the word you use there, responsibility, I think whatever happens in a vote, I think the idea of organisations like an artists' union and that, you know, society must have the people who are heretical, challenging, thrawn, you know, and a lot of those are artists, and I agree with that. And, you know, the Saltaire Society, we're about that whole idea of being a voice that's not wedded to any particular kind of ideology, if you like. So I think these conversations, I think, are, whatever happens, one of the good things that's coming out of the process, I hope. I'm conscious of time. I mean, I would like to hear if there's, because it is about your conversations, then final from the audience that anybody desperate to say or challenge or ask back to the panel.
Yes, can I just say that actually I feel, as someone who's not involved in the arts, but is on the receiving end of it, this is not about us. This is not about you and me. We'll all be dead in 100 years' time if technology advances and actually we live longer. We won't be here. In 500 years' time, our ancestors will look back on us, if we vote yes, with such pride. That's what you should be visualising, not now. 500 years' time, what is a society like ours going to look like if we vote yes? This is not about a political party. It's not about Alex Salmond. I vote SNP. I don't like Alex Salmond. Do you understand that? It's not about you and me. That's selfish to think this is all about us. It is not. It is about our future. Your children and your children's children are their children, and anybody else's wains. I won't be joining in that. I'm a homosexual. I want to have children. So my DNA is not going to pass down through those generations. But I'd like to think that I could influence that in some way by voting yes. And I implore people to look in your hearts, not in your political minds, because that's all I've heard this evening. I haven't heard much from the heart. So, okay. I think I've said my bit.
A voice from the heart. Any other comments for the floor? Okay, I kind of forewarned the panel that I thought we might do this daft wee thing at the end, which is, if you imagine there's a whatever government's in charge, maybe there's not a Creative Scotland, maybe it's in an independent, but there's a Ministry of Culture, and I said to the panel, imagine who you would like, not a politician, to be the Minister for Culture for a new Scotland. So, and why? Any thoughts?
I've been thinking about it since you asked me earlier, and all I can think of is that I really don't like the idea of a Ministry of Culture. I think actually a Ministry of Culture does exactly what Ewan's frightened of, which is saying, right, here's the money, but you have to make this stuff. And it's about dictating the kind of culture that you want, and it's about that kind of managerial politics. It's about centralising power in one place and saying, well, this is the kind of culture that we have, and this is what Scotland is now. Okay. So
you're not going for the position now?
No. Okay. No, I don't. I think actually culture is about what all of us do, and not just artists, but everyone. It's about ways of being, ways of acting. It's about how we live our lives. That's what culture is. It's not some ministerial diktat. Okay. So sorry, I'm copping out.
Sorry?
The Culture Minister should be Irvin Welsh, so that he could actually put his money where his mouth is and move back to Scotland. Then we can get his tax dollars, convert them into whatever currency we're going to use, and start making some new culture out of it.
There you go. Very quick. Ken?
I think the ideal culture minister would be A.L. Kennedy, because as well as being a good writer, she's an accomplished stand-up comedian.
My initial thought was Pat Stanton, because he's the most cultured artist I've ever seen. But I would probably think, no, he doesn't know enough, so maybe Janice Galloway, because she would take everybody. Would you hassle her? She would, no government. Would any government stand up to her?
I've just been asking her to write her next pamphlet, actually. And she keeps hens, which is always good in my book. So, thanks very much. So, that is important. So, thanks to the panel, to Sarah, Ewan, Ken and Kevin. Thanks to all of you. I hope you found it useful, and I look forward to seeing what's going to happen on the 18th of September. Thank you.